Imagine this scenario with me. Your phone lights up. A name appears on your screen that you haven't seen in months, maybe even years. Your heart skips a beat. Your palms get sweaty. That person who walked away, who hurt you, who left you questioning your worth, they're reaching out again. What do? Do you respond? Or do you continue the silence that has defined your relationship for so long? I want to talk to you today about something that touches many of our lives, something that stirs emotion deep within us, something controversial. Should you respond when someone who hurt you reaches out? Should you break that wall of silence you've built for your own protection? Before we dive deeper, I want you to take a moment. Feel the weight of this question in your heart, because your answer says something profound about who you are and who you want to become. This isn't just about responding to a text message or answering a call. This is about how we handle pain, forgiveness, and growth in our lives. I remember standing at this same crossroads myself. That notification appearing on my phone screen felt like a bomb had dropped in my carefully reconstructed life. All the progress I had made, all the healing I had fought for, it suddenly felt fragile, threatened by a simple message from someone who had once meant everything to me. What I'm about to share with you today isn't what most people want to hear. It isn't comfortable. It isn't always easy. But I believe with every fiber of my being that it's what many of you need to hear. Because the path to true freedom isn't always the one that feels good in the moment. When someone reaches out after a period of silence, they're extending a bridge. But before you decide whether to cross it, you need to understand why it's being offered in the first place. Is it built on solid ground, or is it a trapdoor waiting to collapse beneath you? The first thing we must acknowledge is this: people don't change overnight. The person who hurt you, who caused you to build those walls in the first place, they may still be that same person. A text message, a phone call, an email, these things don't automatically signal transformation. Real change takes time, effort, and genuine commitment. So many of us rush back into harmful situations because we're chasing the potential we see in others rather than acknowledging the reality of who they've shown themselves to be. We become addicted to potential, to what could be, while ignoring what is. And that, my friends, is a dangerous game to play with your heart. I've counseled thousands of people who found themselves stuck in cycles of pain because they couldn't distinguish between genuine change and temporary performance. They couldn't see that sometimes when a person reaches out, it's not because they've become someone new, it's because they want something from you. Validation, comfort, ego stroking, or simply to ease their own conscience. Now let me be clear, I'm not saying that people can't change. They absolutely can. I've witnessed remarkable transformations in my years of working with people from all walks of life. But real change leaves evidence. It's not announced, it's demonstrated. It's not promised, it's proven. So when that message appears, when that person who hurt you reaches back out, your first responsibility isn't to them, it's to yourself. Your first question shouldn't be, should I respond, but rather, why are they reaching out now? And what do they want from me? Let's talk about timing for a moment. Timing speaks volumes in these situations. Did they reach out on your birthday, during the holidays, late at night when they're feeling lonely? Or did they contact you when they needed something specific? The timing of their outreach can give you valuable insight into their motivations. People who reach out during vulnerable moments, when they're down, when they're lonely, when they're in need, are often looking for someone to fill a void. And while there's nothing inherently wrong with seeking connection during difficult times, you must ask yourself, where were they when you were struggling? Would they extend the same courtesy to you if the roles were reversed? I've seen too many kind-hearted individuals drop everything to rescue someone who wouldn't cross the street for them. That's not compassion. That's not forgiveness. That's self-abandonment disguised as virtue. The harsh truth that many don't want to hear is this: Some people only reach out when they've exhausted all their other options, when the relationships they prioritized over yours have fallen apart, when they need something that you've historically provided. You deserve better than to be someone's backup plan, their safety net, their last resort. Now, I understand the complexity of this situation. I understand the pull to respond, especially when you once shared something meaningful with this person. There's a part of all of us that hopes for reconciliation, that believes in second chances, that wants to see the best in others. That's the beautiful part of being human, our capacity for forgiveness and hope. But hope must be tempered with wisdom. Forgiveness doesn't always mean reunion. Understanding someone's pain doesn't obligate you to subject yourself to more of it. Compassion has limits, and those limits are defined by self-respect. Let me tell you something that changed my life when I finally understood it. Ignoring someone who hurt you isn't always about punishment. Sometimes it's about protection. It's about creating the space you need to heal, to rediscover your worth, to rebuild what their actions damaged within you. The silence between you isn't empty. It's full of the growth you've achieved, the strength you've developed, the boundaries you've established. Before you consider breaking that silence, ask yourself, am I strong enough now to engage with this person without losing myself? Have I healed enough that their presence no longer threatens my progress? These aren't simple questions. They require honest reflection, perhaps even guidance from trusted friends or professional counselors, but they're necessary questions if you want to make a decision that serves your highest good. I want to address something important here. Some of you may be thinking, but isn't ignoring someone unkind? Shouldn't we always respond with love? This is where many well-intentioned people get trapped in cycles of pain. They confuse kindness with doormat behavior. They mistake boundaries for cruelty. True kindness includes being kind to yourself. True love includes loving yourself enough to protect your peace. Sometimes the most loving thing you can do for both yourself and the other person is to maintain the boundary that separates you. When someone has demonstrated that they don't respect your boundaries, that they're willing to hurt you repeatedly, that they take more than they give, responding to them isn't necessarily the merciful choice. It may actually enable destructive patterns that need to end for both of your sakes. Think about it this way. What message does it send when you rush to respond to someone who has treated you poorly? It communicates that how they treated you was acceptable, that you'll be there regardless of their behavior, that your boundaries are flexible, your self-respect negotiable. Is that really the message you want to send? Is that really the relationship dynamic you want to reinforce? I've worked with individuals who spent years, sometimes decades, trapped in toxic cycles because they couldn't bring themselves to maintain silence. They always answered the call, replied to the text, opened the door, and each time they lost a piece of themselves in the process. The hardest lesson many of us have to learn is this: not everyone deserves access to you. Not everyone who wants to speak to you has earned the right to your attention. Your time, your energy, your emotional resources, these are precious. They're limited, and you get to decide who is worthy of receiving them. This isn't about being cold or calculating. It's about being intentional with your life. It's about recognizing that every time you say yes to someone who hurts you, you're saying no to your own healing. Now, I understand that there are complexities here. Perhaps you share children with this person, perhaps you work together, perhaps there are practical matters that require communication. In these cases, the question isn't whether to respond, but how to respond in a way that protects your boundaries while addressing what's necessary. In such situations, I recommend what I call functional communication. This means engaging only to the extent required by the shared responsibility without opening the door to emotional entanglement. It means being civil but not warm, respectful but not intimate, present but not available. Functional communication looks like responding to a text about picking up the children, but not engaging when the conversation shifts to personal matters. It looks like attending a work meeting professionally, but declining invitations to one-on-one coffee chats. It looks like handling necessary business without volunteering additional access to your life. This approach requires discipline. It requires clarity about your boundaries. And most importantly, it requires that you recognize attempts to blur those boundaries when they occur. Here's a truth many don't want to acknowledge. Some people are strategic in their attempts to regain access to your life. They start with seemingly innocent outreach, a question that needs answering, a memory they wanted to share, a mutual friend they're concerned about. But these are often just foot-in-the-door techniques designed to create openings for deeper engagement. If you've established silence as a boundary with someone, be wary of these tactics. Ask yourself, is this communication truly necessary? Or is it an attempt to reestablish connection on their terms? You are under no obligation to engage with someone simply because they've found a seemingly legitimate reason to contact you. Let's shift gears slightly and talk about forgiveness, because this is where many people get confused. There's a common misconception that forgiveness means reconciliation, that if you've truly forgiven someone, you should welcome them back into your life when they reach out. This is a dangerous misunderstanding of what forgiveness actually is. Forgiveness is an internal process that frees you from the burden of resentment. It's something you do for yourself, not for the other person. It doesn't require their participation, their apology, or even their awareness. You can completely forgive someone and still choose not to have them in your life. You can wish them well from a distance. You can hope for their growth and happiness without being the one to provide it. Forgiveness and boundaries are not mutually exclusive. In fact, they often work best together. Some of the most forgiven people in my life are also the ones I keep at the greatest distance. I've released the anger, the hurt, the desire for retribution, but I've also released the illusion that it's my job to be in relationship with everyone who desires it, regardless of how they've treated me. Now, let's address another common concern. Many people worry that maintaining silence makes them petty or vengeful. They fear they're holding a grudge rather than taking the high road. This fear is often exploited by those who want to regain access to your life without doing the work to earn it. I want to be absolutely clear. Protecting your peace is not petty. Honoring your boundaries is not vengeful. Choosing who has access to your life is not holding a grudge. It's practicing self-respect. The high road isn't always about turning the other cheek. Sometimes it's about having the courage to say, I deserve better than how you treated me, and until I see concrete evidence that you've changed, I'm choosing to keep my distance. This position requires strength. It often goes against our natural inclination toward reconciliation. It may even go against advice from well-meaning friends or family who don't understand the depth of what you experienced. But sometimes the strongest thing you can do is maintain your silence in the face of pressure to respond. Let me share something that might help you if you're currently facing this dilemma. When someone who hurt you reaches out, before you respond, ask yourself these questions. What evidence do I have that this person has changed? Not what they're saying, but what they've actually demonstrated through consistent behavior over time. What do I stand to gain by re-engaging with this person? Is it something substantive and meaningful, or is it just temporary emotional comfort? What do I stand to lose? What parts of my growth, my peace, my current life might be compromised if I welcome this person back? Am I responding out of genuine desire for connection with this specific person? Or am I responding out of habit, guilt, loneliness, or a general discomfort with conflict? These questions can help cut through the emotional fog that often surrounds these situations and get to the heart of what's really at stake. I've found that when people honestly answer these questions, they often realize that their desire to respond has less to do with the person reaching out and more to do with their own unresolved feelings or needs. Sometimes We want to respond not because we genuinely miss that specific person, but because we miss being in a relationship, any relationship. We miss feeling wanted. We miss the comfort of the familiar, even when the familiar was harmful. Recognizing these underlying motivations is crucial to making a decision that serves your highest good rather than your immediate emotional needs. Another important aspect to consider is the manner in which they've reached out. Did they acknowledge the harm they caused? Did they take responsibility for their actions without qualification or excuse? Did they respect the boundary of silence you established? Or did they barrage you with messages across multiple platforms? The way someone reaches out often reveals whether they've done the inner work necessary for a healthy reconnection. If their message focuses on their feelings rather than your experience, if it minimizes the harm they caused, if it comes with expectations of forgiveness or reunion, these are red flags that suggest the dynamic hasn't actually changed. True remorse doesn't demand a response. It doesn't come with conditions. It doesn't make you responsible for managing the other person's feelings about what they did to you. It simply acknowledges wrong, expresses regret, and respects whatever response or non-response you choose to give. I've seen messages that appear apologetic on the surface, but are actually manipulative at their core. "I'm sorry if you felt hurt" is not the same as "I'm sorry I hurt you." "I miss you so much, please talk to me" centers their feelings rather than your experience. "I know I messed up, but I've been going through a lot" attempts to justify harmful behavior rather than take full responsibility for it. Learn to recognize these subtle differences. They tell you whether someone is truly ready to engage in a healthy way or whether they're simply trying to ease their own discomfort without doing the necessary work. There's another crucial point I want to emphasize. You don't owe anyone an explanation for your silence. You don't have to justify your boundaries. You don't need to enumerate the reasons why you've chosen distance over engagement. Many people get trapped in lengthy explanations, trying to make the other person understand why they're maintaining silence. These explanations often become openings for debate, for negotiation, for the other person to try to convince you that your boundaries are unreasonable. Your boundaries are not up for discussion. They're not a starting point for negotiation. They're declarations of what you need to feel safe, respected, and at peace. Anyone who treats them as optional or negotiable is telling you exactly why those boundaries were necessary in the first place. If you've decided that silence is what you need, you have every right to maintain that silence without explanation. Sometimes the most powerful response is no response at all. I know this can feel uncomfortable, especially for those of us who are raised to be polite, to avoid conflict, to always respond when spoken to. But part of adult growth is recognizing that these social norms have limits. They were never meant to override your fundamental right to protect yourself from harm. There's a concept I find helpful in these situations: earned access. The idea is simple but profound. Access to your life, to your time, your energy, your attention, your heart is not an entitlement. It's something that must be earned through consistent respect, care, and integrity. When someone has proven through their actions that they don't value this access, that they're willing to misuse it, abuse it, take it for granted, they forfeit their right to it. They can earn it back, certainly, but doing so requires more than simply reaching out. It requires demonstrated change over time. I sometimes use the metaphor of a bank account. Every relationship has one. Positive interactions make deposits. Harmful ones make withdrawals. When someone repeatedly makes withdrawals without deposits, eventually the account is overdrawn. At that point, simply stopping the withdrawals isn't enough. There needs to be a consistent pattern of deposits to rebuild what was lost. A single message after months or years of silence is not a sufficient deposit to offset a significantly overdrawn relationship account. It's a start, perhaps, but it's not enough to justify full access, restoration. This is where patience comes in. If someone has genuinely changed, if they truly understand the harm they caused and are committed to doing better, they will respect your need for time. They will understand that trust once broken is not instantly rebuilt. They will be willing to prove themselves through consistent action over time. Anyone who pushes for immediate reconnection, who becomes frustrated by your caution, who tries to rush the process of rebuilding, they're showing you that they prioritize their desire for access over your need for safety. That's valuable information about whether real change has occurred. I want to address something that comes up frequently in these situations: the fear of missing out. When someone from your past reaches out, especially someone you once cared deeply about, there's often a fear that if you don't respond, you might miss an opportunity for reconciliation. You might miss witnessing their growth, their change. You might miss what could have been. This fear is natural, but it's also often misplaced. Because here's the truth: if someone has genuinely changed, if they truly value the possibility of having you in their life, your initial non-response won't be the end of their efforts. Real change is persistent. Real remorse is patient. Real growth understands the need for proof over time. The person who gives up after a single unanswered message, who takes your silence as a final rejection rather than as a boundary to be respected, they're telling you something important about the depth of their commitment to making things right. Sometimes not responding is a test, not a manipulative test designed to punish, but a necessary assessment of whether the other person respects your boundaries enough to honor them while still demonstrating their changed behavior in whatever ways they can without direct engagement. There are ways to show change from a distance. There are ways to make amends without immediate access. There are ways to demonstrate growth without requiring your participation. The person who understands this, who focuses on their own improvement regardless of whether reconciliation occurs, that's the person who might eventually be worth reconsidering. But this brings us to another important point. Even if someone has genuinely changed, even if they've done all the work, even if they've demonstrated consistent growth over time, you still have the right to maintain your distance if that's what feels right for you. Change on their part doesn't automatically create an obligation on yours. Their growth doesn't entitle them to your presence. Their improvement is commendable, but it doesn't erase history. You get to decide, based on the totality of your experience and your current needs, whether reconnection serves your highest good. This is perhaps the hardest part for many to accept. We're conditioned to believe that if someone apologizes, if they demonstrate remorse, if they show change, we must forgive and reconcile. But forgiveness, as we've discussed, doesn't mandate reconciliation, and your life is not a democracy where others get to vote on who has access to it. You are the sole authority on who deserves a place in your life, not social pressure, not conventional wisdom, not even the changed person themselves. For some of you, this message comes as a relief. You've been carrying the weight of obligation, feeling that you should respond when someone reaches out, even when your instincts tell you otherwise. I'm giving you permission to honor those instincts, to prioritize your peace, to choose what's best for you without guilt or justification. For others, this message may feel challenging. Perhaps you're someone who believes deeply in second chances, in the power of reconciliation, in never closing the door completely on someone from your past. I honor that perspective. There's beauty in your openness, in your willingness to see the possibility of growth in others. But I would ask you to consider this. Are you extending those second chances from a place of strength and discernment, or from a place of habit and fear? Are you choosing reconciliation because it truly serves your highest good, or because you're uncomfortable with conflict and finality? These are questions only you can answer, but they're worth sitting with, especially if you find yourself repeatedly drawn back into relationships that have proven harmful in the past. Now, let's address another common scenario. What if the person reaching out is someone you need to communicate with for practical reasons? A co-parent, a colleague, a family member with whom you share certain responsibilities? How do you navigate necessary communication while protecting your boundaries? In these cases, I recommend what I call controlled engagement. This means defining very clearly the parameters of acceptable communication. What topics are open for discussion? What methods of contact are permissible? What frequency of interaction is necessary? And then adhering strictly to those parameters. Controlled engagement might look like communicating only through a co-parenting app rather than direct text or phone calls. Limiting emails to specific work topics and specific times of day. Using a designated family member as an intermediary for necessary family business. Setting up automated responses that direct the person to the appropriate channel for necessary communication. The key is to remove emotion from these interactions as much as possible, to treat them as business transactions rather than personal exchanges, to be professional but not warm, responsive but not available, present but not engaged beyond what's necessary. This approach requires discipline, it requires clarity about your boundaries, and it requires that you recognize and respond appropriately when those boundaries are tested, as they almost certainly will be. Because here's what often happens. The person who reaches out for a legitimate reason may try to use that opening to expand into personal territory. The work email drifts into reminiscence about old times. The co-parenting text includes unnecessary details about their personal life. The family business discussion becomes an attempt to reestablish emotional intimacy. When this boundary testing occurs, your response sets the tone for future interactions. If you engage with the personal content, even briefly, you're signaling that your boundary is flexible. If you consistently redirect to the matter at hand, you're reinforcing that your boundary is firm. This isn't always easy. There may be genuine emotion involved. You may feel pulled to respond in kind, especially if the person seems to be reaching out in a positive, non-threatening way. But remember, boundaries are tested not just through aggression, but also through pleasantness. The person who couldn't respect your boundaries when you were in relationship hasn't earned the right to casual warmth simply because their current approach is non-threatening. Maintain your position. Keep your responses focused on what's necessary. If you must acknowledge personal comments, do so briefly and neutrally before redirecting to the matter at hand. I appreciate you sharing that with me. Regarding the project deadline is often sufficient. This controlled engagement serves several purposes. It protects your emotional energy. It communicates your boundaries clearly through action rather than explanation. And perhaps most importantly, it gives you the opportunity to observe over time whether the other person can respect the limitations you've established. Their response to your controlled engagement is valuable information. Do they respect the parameters you've set, or do they consistently try to push beyond them? Do they accept your professional tone, or do they try to force emotional intimacy? Do they focus on the necessary business, or do they create reasons for additional contact? These patterns tell you whether genuine change has occurred, whether they've developed the capacity to respect boundaries, whether they've truly grown in the ways needed for any potential future expansion of your relationship. Because that's the thing about silence and controlled engagement, they're not necessarily permanent states. They're protective measures that create the space needed to heal, to observe, to discern. They can be adjusted over time based on consistent evidence of change and respect. Some relationships that begin with silence evolve into controlled engagement. Some that begin with controlled engagement gradually expand to include more personal connection. The key is that this evolution must be earned through consistent demonstration of respect for your boundaries over time. It must be a choice you make from a position of strength, not a concession made from a position of weakness. For those relationships where reconciliation might eventually be possible, the path there isn't through immediate, unqualified re-engagement when they reach out. It's through a gradual process of observation, testing, and verification that real change has occurred, that the relationship dynamic that caused harm in the first place has been fundamentally altered. If someone has truly changed, they will understand and respect this process. They will recognize that rebuilding trust takes time. They will be willing to prove themselves consistently without demanding immediate access or complete reconciliation. Their focus will be on their own growth and demonstrating that growth, not on regaining what they lost through their actions. Of course, not all relationships are meant to be reconciled, even with genuine change on the other person's part. Sometimes the harm done is too significant. Sometimes too much time has passed. Sometimes your lives have diverged in ways that make reconnection impractical or unhealthy. Sometimes you've simply outgrown the relationship in ways that have nothing to do with the harm caused. In these cases, maintaining silence or limited engagement isn't about punishment or holding a grudge. It's about honoring the natural conclusion of a relationship that has run its course. It's about recognizing that not all connections are meant to last a lifetime, and that's okay. There's a concept in Japanese culture called kintsugi, the art of repairing broken pottery with gold. The philosophy behind it is that breakage and repair are part of the history of an object, not something to disguise. The repair becomes a beautiful part of the object's story, not a shameful secret to hide. Some relationships can undergo this kind of transformation. The break becomes part of their story, not the end of it. The repair done honestly and with appropriate care creates something new and potentially even more beautiful than what existed before. But not all broken things are meant to be repaired. Some breaks are clean and final. Some pottery is shattered beyond what can be meaningfully reassembled. Some relationships have served their purpose in our lives and are meant to remain in our past, cherished for what they taught us, but not restored to active presence. Discerning which category a particular relationship falls into requires honest self-reflection. It requires looking beyond the immediate emotional pull to reconnect and considering the larger picture of what this relationship brought to your life, what it cost you, and whether its restoration truly serves your highest good. This discernment is deeply personal. What's right for one person may not be right for another, even in seemingly similar circumstances. That's why generic advice like always forgive and reconcile or never go back to someone who hurt you is inadequate. The reality is more nuanced, more individual, more complex. What I can offer you is a framework for making this decision, questions to consider, perspectives to explore. But the ultimate choice, whether to respond when someone reaches out, whether to maintain silence, whether to engage in a limited way, that choice belongs to you alone. Trust yourself in this. Trust your instincts. Trust the wisdom you've gained through your experiences. You know this person. You know what they're capable of, both the good and the harmful. You know what you need to feel safe, respected, and at peace. Let that knowledge guide you. And remember, whatever you decide, it doesn't have to be permanent. You can choose silence today and reconsider tomorrow. You can attempt controlled engagement and step back if it doesn't feel right. You can even try reconciliation and later decide that it's not working for you. Your boundaries are yours to establish, adjust, and maintain according to your needs at any given time. The only constant requirement is that you honor yourself in the process, that you make choices from a place of self-respect rather than fear, obligation, or habit, that you prioritize your well-being, your growth, your peace over the comfort or desires of someone who previously demonstrated a willingness to compromise these things. I've spent many years working with individuals navigating exactly this terrain. I've seen the struggle, the self-doubt, the pull between what feels right and what feels easy. I've witnessed the courage it takes to maintain silence when every fiber of your being wants to respond. And I've observed the freedom, the peace, the growth that comes from honoring your boundaries despite external pressure to compromise them. What I've learned is this. The path of self-respect is rarely the easiest path, but it is always the one that leads to genuine peace. The short-term discomfort of maintaining boundaries, of sitting with the uncertainty of what if, of resisting the pull to reconnect prematurely, this discomfort is the price of long-term well-being. And it's a price worth paying, because on the other side of that discomfort is a life defined by choices made from strength rather than weakness. A life where your boundaries are respected because you respect them first. A life where your peace is protected because you've learned to protect it yourself. This is the gift you give yourself when you carefully consider whether to respond when someone reaches out after a period of silence. Not just the immediate protection from potential harm, but the lasting foundation of self-respect that will serve you in every relationship, every interaction, every decision going forward. So when that notification appears on your screen, when that name you haven't seen in months or years suddenly reappears in your life, take a deep breath. Remember that you have options. Remember that you have power. Remember that you have wisdom gained through experience that can guide you toward what's truly best for you. You don't have to decide immediately. You don't have to respond reflexively. You can take time to check in with yourself, to process your feelings, to consider your options. The urgency you may feel is often more about their timing than any actual need for immediate action on your part. In fact, allowing yourself this pause, this space to consider rather than react, is itself an act of self-respect. It's a declaration that your response will be determined by your needs and boundaries, not by their timing or expectations. It's an assertion of your right to make decisions on your own timeline, according to your own wisdom.